right. Well, thanks for being in attendance to today's webinar on does the UN get e-commerce? And part of the reason that we're having this webinar is Patrick, who's with Perimeter, went to the UN e-commerce week, which was, I believe it was in early April, Patrick,
Correct.
That was. And I had the opportunity to go out with Patrick to the UN and be on the panel. I'm Clint Reid. I'm the CEO of Zonos, founder. And we are, here today to talk a little bit about what was might not be the type of e-commerce conference that you would, normally think. And hoping that this kind of opens some eyes for those that are really in the e-commerce world to a lot of these governments and their perspective on a lot of the difficulties in e-commerce and cross-border. So, before we get started, I just, I want to say that the campus, when I got to the UN, was it was really cool. I did walk in the wrong building, and I was sort of walking down the hall, and I saw people sitting in these offices with their doors open. I thought, this seems super unsecure, that I could just, and then again, I don't know who was all working in all these different offices, but and I guess they thought I just worked there too. And then I went to the correct building. So
I had the total opposite experience. I was run after by guards, which is always fun.
Really? Okay. Yep. So I went in on the right side then. Yeah. Well, actually, it was really secure getting in. But once I was in, you just you're in,
I think I must have looked more dangerous than you.
For sure. Patrick, why don't you quickly give some of your background? We've worked together for a while, known each other for a little while now. And then would love to hear about some of the objectives that talk maybe a little bit about the panel that we had at UN e-commerce week and some of your observations, and we can kind of just jump into how that went.
Yeah. First, thank you for having me. Now, I'm I have a dual role. So I am a member of the Getting to Global initiative. Getting to Global is an organization that brings together resources from the public and private sectors to help companies export. And we were born primarily as let's say a think tank to think of new ways companies can use e-commerce, more specifically, to start selling abroad and start selling overseas. In fact, our motto originally was sell more online overseas. I'm the head of Perimeter, which is the product development studio that is now working hand in hand with Getting to Global to bring to the market products that will help companies export. So we are the creators of the Getting to Global Export Accelerator, and now we are launching tomorrow the Getting to Global Exports Marketplace. And we were invited by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, to basically host a panel in early April during UNCTAD e-commerce week. And as you've mentioned, this is not the type of e-commerce conference we were expecting. Obviously, we've been to a lot of e-commerce conference, and when we, it appeared very clear a few weeks before we got there that this was very much geared towards legislators and regulators, more so than targeting CEOs. So the e-commerce week in general is a forum to bring together people from governments, ministries, trade organizations, trade promotion organizations, foreign direct investment organizations, and bring them together to discuss the potential of e-commerce for trade, for fostering trade and international commerce, but also to empower emerging economies, developing countries, and bring them into this sort of now digital global economy, if you will. So our panel was discussing the potential of e-commerce primarily in the context of trade promotion. So in the context of getting companies to export their goods. And initially that's why obviously we brought a Adolfo Fernandez from Google on board to talk to us about the great, the larger trends in the digital economy. We also obviously invited you, Clint, to join us on stage to discuss very specific challenges, technical challenges that companies are facing when making sales online. And then to bring the perspective of developing countries, we invited Anne Chapas from the International Trade Center to really, and she is the person responsible for helping trade promotion organizations in developing countries build their capabilities, especially around e-commerce. And I think it's going to be worth discussing how much e-commerce is interesting for developing countries.
And isn't the ITC, it was interesting, she had mentioned that 50% of it's owned by the WTO, and then the other 50% is owned by
UNSTAD in this
right?
case. Exactly.
Yeah, to try to keep as neutral because that was kind of balance out, I guess.
You're right, absolutely. So UNSTAD is really there, like the development aspect of UNSTAD is much more important than the trade. They're really there to help emerging economies through trade. Whereas the WTO, the World Trade Organization, is very much a mercantile organization, if you will. So they're walking this very, very thin line,
right?
Really fine line, and so that they're really at the line between really development and pure trade. So they have a really interesting approach, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and Anne was amazing. So. And was really well versed on the developing nations and all. It was very insightful.
Yeah, and she brought a whole different I would say perspective, because we're the technologists discussing about how technology can do this, technology can do that, how we can streamline this, and then she'd just raise her finger and say, half the population does not even have internet access. They don't have access to email. Yes, they pay with mobile phones, but they're using mobile phones that don't even, offer the ability to see a website. So what's your solution then? So it's a sobering. She brings this sort of sobering perspective to everything. Yeah. But she also had a few great insights to share with the crowd over there.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I think a lot of the crowd could relate a lot of what she was talking about. So to the crowd a little bit, because it was very, bureaucrat, what TPO, right? You're going to use that term you have. Can you just dive into a little bit of what is a trade promotion organization, and what are their roles in these countries?
Well, the role of a TPO, first and foremost, if you oversimplify everything, is to help companies in the country export to other countries, and to do so profitably and safely. And their role really is to help, on paper, any company sell more of their goods and their production overseas, whether it's products or even services. That being said, typically a trade promotion organization in a developed country will focus a lot on the larger deals. So, and I think we discussed that earlier. When a TPO can invest its time signing $150 million deals, or to focus on closing $5,000 deals. For them, the math is really easy. They're always going to go with the big deals, with the deals and the transactions that move the economic impact needle a lot more. So that's what you see in developed countries. And then in developing countries, you'll see them being more on the, they're not really trying to export anything. They're trying to attract money from the UN, from the WTO, from the OECD. They're trying to get funding to then build the capabilities in country to, increase production, improve production, to eventually 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in the future, really, work on exporting more than their, local productions of fruits or minerals or things like that. So
that's a challenge of yours, right? At getting to global, is educating TPOs around more than just what almost seems easier to focus on at just a massive deal for one or two organizations that have a limited number of SKUs that they're exporting, versus focusing on the thousands of online retailers that are trying to export. It sounds like that's definitely got to be a challenge for getting to global.
It is a challenge. It is a challenge primarily for all TPOs really, because TPOs are measured on, they have conflicting objectives. So the first objectives is economic impact, where the big, larger transactions will always win, but are also measured, their impact is measured on the number of companies they will help. So in this, in one case, the more companies you have, that you will not find $50 million deals all the time, right? So when they have to focus, well, obviously one is easier in terms of efforts, and the cost benefit of a large transaction makes sense, but then they're being incentivized for something completely different, and usually mutually exclusive. So a lot of our focus has to be on how we can bring some level of automation and of self-service in their transactions with, in this case, for example, US businesses. So it's always a challenge. We always have to walk them through how technology can help them serve more US businesses, serve them faster, double the output without doubling the size of their team. So yeah, it's always an uphill battle, I would say, because they're just being incentivized for ultimately the wrong things. And and I think this brings us to an interesting topic. Most TPOs and the US, Europe, Canada, I'd say they're more technically savvy, but still for them, e-commerce is completely alien half of the time. So you're always fighting this fight against, difficult or mutually exclusive objectives, and then just this lack of general knowledge on e-commerce and its more practical aspects like duties and taxes, shipping, and
well, I think that was one of the big challenges or surprises for me when I went. Is I definitely knew the audience was very was government oriented, and there'd be the TPOs, but also the those that are in with the WTO or let me, I guess, give an example of one of the, type of attendees that I ran into. I was going through security on the second day. This was the day that we did our session. And I ran into, right in security, a lady that had been on a panel the day before. And that panel, the entire, first, the WTO was represented on that panel. And the WTO talked a lot about trying to improve, streamline the whole HS coding and classification process, because that is definitely a barrier to selling internationally. And then, but the biggest point of the conversation was all about consumer protection. Where's this data being held? And it just, to me, it just sounded like GDPR all over again for e-commerce. And I brought this up to the lady once I had the opportunity. I said, look, I watched your panel yesterday, and is that really all your constituents or the consumers in your country are looking for? Are they really, is privacy their number one concern? Because we work with hundreds of online retailers and get feedback from thousands and thousands of customers. And they're worried that the process is so untrustworthy when you buy cross-border that nothing is transparent, right? Everything is confusing. They're getting hit with the duties and taxes when it arrives. And I'm educating her, at least I feel like I am, educating her on the perspective of the online retailers that we deal with and their customers, and what they're saying, which is, just tell me the basics, yes, I think they're worried about privacy. Everybody is. But I was a little bit worried that was a very major focus of so many of the representatives there at the UN.
You are absolutely right. And this is the same kind of conversation I'm having all the time. And to my point, the point I make usually, or in my opinion, the matter, and that's what research has demonstrated, is that for a consumer, they're not really focused as much. Obviously, you need to hit some level of that privacy protection that you should always strive to achieve. But what they're really concerned is simplicity, transparency, and overnight shipping. You know, if they can get something overnight, you know what? They'll, like I said, they'll send you their DNA sequencing if that's what they need to do. But and I think that raised an interesting point is in their approach. Most of the people that were there were some people from the private sector. I think we were some of the representatives. Let's say maybe 10% from the private sector. But everybody that was there was either from a government, from the UN, from the WTO, from the World Customs Organization, and to them, everything always came down to regulations, either more of, less of, and it made every single conversation about regulation. That's something I deal with on a daily basis when I'm talking to TPOs.
Right.
But you know, they're always asking us, you know, should there be more? Should there be less? And in my opinion, it should just be stable. You know,
Right.
leave the regulation as is. Provide us with a good bedrock of strong, fair, secure guidelines, and then let us, through technology, work our magic, and we'll make sense of it. We'll figure out a way to make that more user-friendly, more transparent, more useful, and more streamlined. But really, the last thing I believe we need in this context is more well, not necessarily more regulations, but more talks of regulations. We know what's not working well. We all agree. And I think the next step, I think in 2021, they're coming up with a refreshed harmonized schedule code system.
Yeah.
That's one example where we can make a lot of difference. And I don't think focusing so much on privacy, now that we have GDPR in place and already strong guidelines, we can focus on something else.
I mean, I think that's exactly it. Like, you know, you don't need to create another GDPR. GDPR is out there and I mean, if they do, you know, keep going down the route of additional, you know, more regulations with cross-border, because cross-borders is different. I mean, how does that affect these developing nations that are just trying to trying to get their, you know, feet under them to start doing cross-border?
Mm-hmm. I mean, we, especially in the United States, we had the chance to really live the Wild West era of e-commerce, where, you know, you didn't really have to charge any sales taxes. You could ship anywhere, and you would obviously pay some fees, but where it was fairly simple. Now, if you're just starting out as a country in e-commerce, you'll find that there's a large body of law and regulations that really gets, in some cases, gets in your way. Not because, you know, philosophically, I think it's fine. It's just from a logistical and from a complexity standpoint, you're forcing the need for or you're creating a huge learning curve for people that you know sometimes don't have access to the kind of education that we have here. So it's creating I would say a two-tiered access to e-commerce, one for, you know, developed countries and one for developing countries that, because of this complexity, always end up on large marketplaces and are not really don't have the opportunity to build their own online presence, which, you know, sort of prevents them from communicating an interesting stronger brand messaging and things like that. So it's a whole missed opportunity, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. And let me just make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Am I sharing my notes or which
I think you're sharing your notes, yeah.
My notes, I think, are more interesting than the current slide anyway. That's an easy fix. All right. I mean, well, not like this is way less interesting, my notes. Can you see this? Or is it still seeing my notes?
Yeah, we can see United Nations building in Geneva. By the way, a beautiful building, beautiful compound. The city itself is amazing. And once you get over the fact that I don't think you can eat under $50, it's a fun city to be in, really.
Yeah. It was, you know, I got to go visit one of our customers out there, and that is actually in Geneva, which was unexpected. You know, because the majority of the retailers we work with are in the U.S. But I'll tell you, their biggest concern, which also wasn't talked a lot about at the conference, was Brexit. And they were so concerned about how Brexit was going to affect their e-commerce business that was shipping from Switzerland into the UK. And that was a huge painful point for them, was that uncertainty, right? Like I said, like I think you just said, which is so important, is that stabilization is what's really needed. People just want their expectations set and know what they keep it as simple as possible. And Brexit's just a bunch of uncertainty right now for all retailers. And
I completely agree. And I think it slows down adoption of even e-commerce in certain European countries. But this raises the point. Uncertainty is one thing. The unknowns are also one big factor that prevent businesses from, and TPOs really, from embracing e-commerce as much as they could. We were sitting in the room and we were talking. I think that it was you, Clint, that covered some of the more practical, I would say, problems that you can face in your e-commerce endeavor and your e-commerce journey. And I think that a lot of people in the room were just never heard of having to pay duties and taxes. When you get a package delivered to you, never really. There's so many things that they did not know. They did not know that. I think creating or removing this fear of the unknown by telling them at least about some of the basics really went a long way in making them understand the value of e-commerce for their clients.
Yeah, I know. I think, I hope you're right. My observation was once that, I had prepped kind of I made some assumptions that I probably shouldn't have assumed. One is that they knew what an e-commerce platform was, or that they knew even what Shopify was or Magento, and I would say that the majority of people in the audience probably did not. And that was surprising, but I'm like, okay, yeah, this isn't a technology, focused conference necessarily, but the part, even e-commerce. But the part that blew my mind was what you just said. I don't think they actually fully understood the process for low value goods getting shipped cross-border, and how that process affects the consumer, how it affects the business, right, that's getting hit with chargebacks because the person won't pay for the duties and taxes it's clearing customs. And so, yeah, it was definitely where I thought I was going to kind of be able to focus a lot more on how do you solve this problem. So much of it was just focusing on education around what is the problem. And so that was by far, I think, the most surprising thing for me about the attendees was the lack of understanding of how different low-value e-commerce cross-border is than high-value cross-border commerce.
I completely agree. I've been more involved in, let's say, global trade technology for 4 years now, and that is the thing that amazed me the most. It still amazes me every day. I'll sit down with a TPO, and nowhere in their thinking is there mention or even a notion of e-commerce and small transactions. They are still very much in the mindset of moving millions of dollars worth of goods through sea lanes, and the mindset and very much in a business to business setting, and they're not thinking about the potential for smaller transactions, things that fly under the de minimis, and that can really be a really effective first contact with international sales for a company.
Do most of them know what de minimis is? What de minimis is?
I would say, I don't want to offend anyone here because I'm working.
Okay, I'll say
I'll say it's 50-50.
Okay, I would have said 20% new. So you're pretty generous. That's good. And then there's so much talk about then they do want to simplify the harmonization system when a lot of countries have already, I think, come up with some things to streamline the consumer side of cross-border, and not everybody knows, right, that if India, when it is a low-value good, the tax act calculations can actually turn out to be pretty simple. Once it goes over a certain value, it gets more complicated, and that's even without having a low de minimis value. So I think there's kind of those two stages that can
can be looked at to streamline the cross-border e-commerce. One is de minimis value has the most, by far the biggest impact, because if it can just clear customs without getting having to figure out what the duties and taxes are. But the second is having kind of a centralized system that applies a simplified duty rate. And I do think that there's, for just e-commerce, I think there's opportunities for countries to look more closely at that. But we do see that, and with countries like Australia coming out with their low-value GST law that's been now in place for almost a year. And I think more laws like that are going to happen where the onus is going to be turning more to the retailer to pay the duties and taxes, the exporter versus, or the taxes in this case with Australia versus the importer. So I think what, you know, over the next year, I assume you're going to be heading back probably next year to the e-commerce week again, and getting the global is going to continue to try to educate as much as possible the TPOs and these type of people about these challenges. Am I correct?
That is correct. I mean, we'll always be happy to join any forum where people are willing to discuss simplifying trade and making sure that more companies go global every day. I mean, this is our mission, and you know, that's what we'll continue doing, both by educating companies and inspiring companies by showing them that it can be easy to go global, but also by educating and working and building tools for trade promotion organizations.
Okay, great. So if anybody has any questions for Patrick or myself, you know, maybe I missed some questions that were in the notes, so you could have already seen, maybe those were answered. And then, but my email is clint@zonos.com. There's Patrick's email right there as well. And, you know, feel free to reach out. We're happy to you know, give any additional insights on some of our thoughts about UN e-commerce week, or how some of these conversations might affect you as an online retailer if you're going to go global. Well, Patrick, thank you for taking the time today. I think that was extremely insightful. And again, thanks for the invite and I think you did I had told everybody at Zonos about the conference, and a lot of other people in the industry, and just said you did a great job on the moderation on that panel, and a lot better job than I did today. So it was kind of interesting to flip shoes a little bit, but yeah, I appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure, Clint, and it's been a pleasure to have you in Geneva with me.
All right. Okay. Thanks, Patrick.
Talk to you soon.